Hello guys, it's me, Greed here. Today I'm talking about tanking in 5v5 and 6v6 and some reasons why it feels absolutely garbage. I think one of the main points is solo responsibility. When you are, especially in 5v5, when you are the solo tank, you obviously have to frontline, you have to eat all the pressure, you have to peel for your team, you have to deny the angles, you have to cut the lanes, you have to do everything. And if you don't, the game is your fault. It's obviously not your fault, but people like to believe that if the tank doesn't do quite literally everything, then clearly the tank is trolling. So this is a pretty common thing that's said across basically every rank in the game. Even in top 500 you can't escape this. But people have this grand idea that the tank, because they are the solo tank and because they are the strongest hero in the game at that point, which is bad. But because they are that way, they assume, oh, my tank is stronger than my character, therefore they should do twice as much as my character, which doesn't actually make any sense, because the buffs given to 5v5 tanks were to remedy the fact that they were down another tank, not to make them technically twice as strong as anyone else, because in a lot of cases, you being a solo tank is a lot worse than being two tanks. Two weaker tanks are together, actually coordinating, are stronger than one solo tank. But one solo tank is easier to pressure down because you don't need to split your pressure between two different targets doing two different things. Meaning that a 5v5 tank is technically weaker than two individual 6v6 tanks working together, and a 5v5 tank is easier to pressure down, but a 5v5 tank feels exceptionally worse because of the fact that that single 5v5 tank is able to output substantially more pressure than one singular tank is in 6v6, while also being able to be focused down at the same level as a 6v6 tank, technically speaking, which means you have a lot of situations where, although it may feel as though because you have a 5v5 tank, that 5v5 tank should be so strong and be able to go out and do things, it means that they actually can't, because the amount of pressure they're eating is more pressure than they can survive. For example, if you're on Ramatra and you don't have your shield cooldown, if they have, let's say they've got like Mauga, let's say they got Ana, let's say they got other CC, they've got Mei with the right click perk, there is so many things preventing you from walking forward, and although Ramatra is so overpowered, it's irrelevant to some degree because you are being CC'd to the point that you're unable to output the pressure that your 5v5 tank is able to give out, and the benefits of being a 5v5 tank are easier to mitigate, which means you feel like you have so much responsibility when in a lot of cases your only actual responsibility is staying alive long enough to force enough cooldowns that your team is able to actually do the work for you, because 5v5 tanking is actually less about going and being a playmaker and more about just trying to stay alive for long enough for your team to go and do shit, because although you're so strong, you also take up the vast majority of the focus, and that's another problem with tanking. Is you're the focus fire magnet. Now this applies to 5v5 and 6v6. Because you're most likely to be on the front line, you're also the biggest target, it means you're just going to receive the most pressure. Because of two reasons. Firstly, like I said, you're obviously the biggest target, but secondly, you're also the target that's able to take the most space. Therefore, the more pressure you apply onto a tank hero, the less time they actually have to go and make all the space that their team wants. Therefore, you're incentivized to give the tank as much pressure as possible. Meaning, as a tank, you're more likely to get CC'd, you're more likely to get hit with copious amounts of burst damage, you're more likely to just be shot at by multiple targets, you're more likely to get chased around, and so on. And although in 5v5, you're more able to survive those things because your character is so much stronger, it means that even if you are surviving it, the actual experience is not fun. You don't feel like you're doing anything other than being a sponge. You're just kind of eating it for your team, which is not a very fun gameplay experience. And a lot of the time in 6v6 as well, it can feel like that. For example, if you're a Reinhardt player and you're against Ramatra and Mauga and all these kind of characters, these 5v5 tanks especially, there's a lot of cases where you just kind of get bullied and you can never drop your shield to go and be proactive and do anything, because if you do, you'll be immediately melted because the tanks are so strong. A big issue with a lot of the tanks in this game is that they are typically a lot shorter range, but at their short ranges, they're able to output a shitload of pressure. Meaning that if you're a short range tank, like a Reinhardt, It means that another short-range tank, like a Queen, is technically able to output more pressure onto that Reinhardt because the range is slightly more, but the pressure might also be slightly less in some cases. Meaning that a Reinhardt, while technically speaking, is stronger in the brawl than a Queen, sometimes, it may mean that the Reinhardt is never actually able to brawl the Queen because the Queen is better at managing distance. Meaning the tanks that manage the distance actually end up being significantly stronger because of the fact that poke is such a strong meta. It's strong because of the fact that it's the easiest thing to stay alive on. You have the most survivability options in a poke meta, which is why the tanks that typically poke are usually stronger. Another issue is the cooldown resilience. Many tanks depend on long cooldowns. Once burned, they're vulnerable and feel useless. This is especially a problem in 6v6 because a big balance decision they made was making it so the cooldowns were longer on the tank heroes, and that was justification for there being two tanks, is the cooldowns were longer and their health was lower, and that was them saying, now they're balanced for 6v6. This is a bad way to do it. The best way to do it would be to lower the potency of the cooldowns, less so than lowering the amount that happen per time. This obviously causes a lot of issues. One that I haven't seen people talk about a lot is it kind of breaks the main tank off tank formula because the cooldowns are so high and the pressure cycles are so far and few between. It means that in a lot of cases, it doesn't even matter if your two tanks that you've picked technically synergize well. If their pressure cycles are off by even a few seconds, it can mean that you basically almost never work together. Like, think of a tank like Doomfist and a tank like Ball. Like, on paper, it seems like they would work pretty good together. They're both dive tanks, they've both got a decent bit of burst damage, they can both follow up on targets pretty good. They seem like they should work together. But Ball and Doom are actually horrible together because the times when Doom engages and the time when Ball engages are so wildly different because of their cooldown management. The way you're engaging on a Doomfist is you're getting all of your cooldowns, you're waiting out a situation, you're hard engaging, going fast, getting out. With Ball, you're constantly disrupting, you're rolling through the team, you're coming back, you're setting up, you're PDing, you're rolling through the team, you're coming back. You're doing it constantly, you're not waiting for your Doomfist. And that's obviously not just coming down to balance, that's design as well. But when you have these scenarios where there is no main tank and there is no off tank, you technically just have two 5v5 tanks. You have two main tanks, or two off tanks, or two super tanks, or whatever you want to call it, and you don't have two tanks that are born to synergize together. Think like Reinhardt and Zarya. In 6v6, they still work super well, but because you have a thing like charge cancel, it can mean that the pressure cycle of a Zarya and a Reinhardt is then off. They do not pressure cycle at the same moments, because a Reinhardt might see a guy in an angle, pin all the way over to them, beat them with the fucking hammer, Zarya hits a big bubble on him, that was good, Zarya gets some energy, now Zarya is moving forward to capitalize on the energy she gained. But the Reinhardt can't walk forward anymore, because he's just popped his charge, cancelled it in their team, beat a squishy to death, and now he's waiting to stay alive. He's waiting for supports to help him out. He needs to stabilize. But now the Zarya, that's when the Zarya wants to go. So they're off balance again when these two characters used to be amazing for each other, whereas Reinhardt's in a position now where he's so bad, the only value he gets is through dive Rein with the charge cancel, which doesn't work with Zarya. They've managed to balance the game in a way where Zarya and Reinhardt do not actually work that well together anymore because their pressure cycles are so different and far between each other that it means that they do not work together in a lot of cases. Now, obviously, if you're playing traditional Zarya Ryan comp and the Reinhardt's playing more frontlining and you're matching pressure cycles, it obviously works, but you're getting so little value on the Reinhardt at that point because you have the opportunity to go and charge cancel on someone, that it means that if you want to play synergistically, you are putting yourself and your team at a massive disadvantage, which is very, very silly and very, very fixable, and they just don't want to. Another thing is your support dependency while you're on tank. People are going to say this is like cope or whatever, but if you're on tank, you just simply need more healing than the rest of your team. You do. If you've got the DPS passive on you, your supports need to look at you more. If your supports aren't looking at you more, you can't do anything. If you can't do anything, your team is blaming you, you're tilting. You know what I mean? How are you meant to do anything? For example, if I've got Lucio Mercy on my team, the Mercy's pocketing the Sojourn, and the Lucio's diving the Widowmaker, how the fuck do my two DPS, like Reaper and May or whatever, expect me to walk through the front line and actually make some space? It's a physical impossibility. If you do not get the support, you simply cannot do anything. Now, obviously, if you're the best player in the world, and you know exactly what tank to pick, and you know exactly, right, if you play absolutely perfectly, you can. But I'm talking for like the gold player here. What is the gold Zarya player meant to do if their supports aren't healing them? Do you know what I mean? Obviously, they're making a lot of mistakes. That's not the point. The point is, can they actually potentially have some kind of solo impact on the game? They absolutely can, but it takes so much more effort than it actually is worth in a lot of cases. You need to be basically smurfing by a pretty big degree in your normal lobby to do anything if your supports are on the wrong heroes. And that's especially for 5v5. In 6v6, it's not as bad because you have another tank to rely on. There's obviously more targets for you to actually go for, and there's obviously more people for the enemy team to go for, which means that your angles are probably going to be more potent. So that's more of a 5v5 problem, but it still definitely exists in 6v6, because there's a lot of cases where it's just like, if I received one Ana heal here, I could do something, but my Ana's healing the other tank, my Ana's healing this guy, my Ana's fighting, or whatever it may be. And having such a dependency on supports isn't a bad thing. It is a good thing. However, when you have things in the game like DPS passive, it means that supports don't want to support because it's less valuable to heal people than it is to do damage. Which means the tanks are relying on a part of the game which is weaker, a part of the balance of the supports that is objectively lower value than the DPS portion. You have a role that is built on depending on value that is shit in comparison to potentially higher value. That's a big problem. CC in this game is another big issue. Despite CC being reduced overall, tanks still suffer disproportionately from stuns, slows, and hacks because they're always on the front line. You're just simply more likely to get hit with it. You're more likely to get slapped, you're more likely to get anti, you're more likely to get bit by a ball, you're more likely to get stomped on by Malga. You are just simply more likely to get hit by CC. And CC is boring, and it's also insanely potent. Getting hit with a sleep is the difference between winning a fight and losing a fight. It's gargantuan how big of a difference it can make to get hit with some CC. And it isn't necessarily that tanks should have some kind of CC mitigation. It's the fact that the CC itself, in a lot of cases, is not balanced with the tank effect in mind. For example, Sleep Dart is a really perfect example of this. There are so many cases where an Ana would want to use Sleep Dart. There's a Tracer flanking, you want to Sleep Dart that. There's a Reinhardt pushing you want to Sleep Dart that. Your team is getting killed, you want to Sleep Dart that. There's not just one thing where you're like, oh, well, that's happening, I'm going to CC that. Unlike maybe like a Junkrat main, if you're standing down main and just spamming your balls down main, then what are you going to use your mines for? A lot of them just decide, I'm just going to wing it at the tank and blow the tank up. Because, well, it's just good value, right? You just launch the tank away from you. There's nothing you can do. If you just do that continuously, even if you're not killing him, you burn, what, a minute, 2 minutes off the time bank total over the course of the whole game just from throwing mines at him. That's a crazy amount of value just for clicking a button on someone over and over again, right? Burst damage meta. Now, this is especially a 5v5 problem, but think double sniper, right? What do you do as, like, any of the tanks in this game, basically, against double sniper? Even if you're on Winston, what do you do? Right? The Sojourn railguns you in the face, half your health bar's gone. Widowmaker shoots you, half your health bar's gone. Hanzo headshots you, half your health bar's gone. You just really can't do anything. All it takes is them to hit one skill check, one shot, and half your health bar is simply just boomed. Because in 5v5, there is no ability to actually go and deal with those longer range threats without thus leaving your team behind. Therefore, they have to fight a super tank while your super tank's off dealing with other people. And if they can successfully run away from you for long enough, your team will simply never win. You need follow-up. 5v5 simply has a greater requirement for teamwork. That might seem wrong and might seem bizarre to say, but because of the fact that a lot of the tank heroes require to do so many things at one time, whether that be like pressuring backline, pressuring front lane, or whatever else it may be, it means that in the cases where you need to go and do something that takes you away from something else, your teammates need to have the understanding that that part of our weaknesses is exposed. Therefore, we need to go and do something about it as a team. But if your team don't do that, well, then you just lose by default because people are going to take the simpler method. Which means if the enemy team is a better widow than you do, you will lose. Unlike in 5v5, or unlike in 6v6, sorry, where if you're on Monkey and your other guy's on, I don't know, literally any other tank in the game, you can go, I can rely on him to watch the front line for a second while I go and do something. That's a big issue with 5v5. However, it happens in both. Because it doesn't matter what hero you play, if the enemy team has a bunch of burst damage, no matter what you're on, your tank hero will feel it. That is just an objective reality of the game. Hero pool, this one's obviously pretty obvious as well. There's just not a lot of tanks in this game. There's a lot more now than there was before, but a lot of them do not have, like I said before, an off tank or a main tank presence in this game, right? A lot of them are just simply tank hero. They are 5v5 super tank. They're not off tank and main tank, which means their synergistic capabilities of them is diminished massively because a lot of them do not have similar pressure cycles or work well together, right? Think like Mauga, right? Who does Mauga work well with? Name a single tank Mauga's pressure cycle aligns with. It's no one. There is no one. There's no one Mauga can partner with that they have natural synergy with each other. They do not play similarly at all, which means if you're picking Mauga, doesn't matter what tank you're picking, you're just going to have to deal with the fact that you've got a Mauga, and you're going to have to do your best to deal with him. Now, obviously, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's not like, if this hero, then this hero. It doesn't have to work like that. But there needs to be some inherent value to picking a character that's naturally synergistic with that hero. But with Mauga, there simply isn't. There is no character in the game where you just simply pick them, and then all of a sudden, you get some innate synergistic value because you were smart and decided to go with the hero that works well with that guy. That doesn't exist anymore, which is a big problem in 6v6 because that was a big part of Overwatch 1 and why things worked so well. Double Bubble, Pulled Pork, right? Ryan Zarya, like all the natural team compositions that work well together were based on tank synergies because your tank synergy is what decided the flow of the game. Now, obviously, towards the middle to the end of Overwatch 2, it came down to what your supports played, but the natural composition was based off of what your tanks played because your supports were able to sustain it no matter what. So they still dictated the flow regardless of the fact that the supports were really broken. But it is what it is. That is a couple of problems. Now, obviously, there's a lot of problems with tank. You also obviously have the ult battery problem where you're just a massive ult battery and people just shoot you all day for ult charge. You have map dependency where some tanks are really, really bad on some maps and really, really good on others. A lot of heroes don't have any clear identity. Take Mauga and Ram. What do they actually do? They're just... one of them's a frontline slave that blocks all day. The other one is shoot gun character because there's no identity. They're punished for mistakes a lot harder, especially in 5v5 because that's the difference between winning a fight and losing a fight. And you obviously have the lack of agency where because you're receiving more pressure, you're not going to receive as many, or your resources are diminished faster, which means your resources can't be spent to be as aggressive as often. Therefore, your resources get diminished because you're naturally getting focused down more. That applies to every character in the game. The more focus you get, the less value you're simply going to be able to get because the less uptime you have. Tanks naturally have an ability to be pressured down easier than a lot of other characters are. Therefore, tanks naturally are going to have a lack of agency, or more likely to have a lack of agency in the game, especially when you have less synergistic values, when you have things that are not like Ryan Zarya in the game, and you have more things like Mauga and Ram. But it is what it is. I love you all. I hope you have a good day. You're all beautiful. I love you all. Goodbye. 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 Goodbye.